What was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday morning became the moment that would define and nearly destroy 14-year-old Michael Politte's life. He woke up to the smell of smoke, crawled through his burning home, and found his mother on fire in the hallway. Within days, Michael was behind bars and being accused of murdering the one person he loved the most. Hey guys, and welcome to the Moms and Mysteries podcast, a true crime podcast featuring myself, Mandy, and my dear friend, Melissa. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Mandy. How are you?
I am hanging in there. There. That's all I got for you.
If you're trying to beat the heat, I have a suggestion. I don't know. I think I'm late to this, but my daughter and I went to go see Superman today, and it was so good. Can you believe it?
Superman beats the heat?
Superman beats the heat. It was so good. I'm not like a superhero movies gal. Marvel's not my thing. Avengers, no thank you. I don't even know if Superman falls into either of those.
Right, or which one it does, if
any. But I grew up watching, The New Adventures of Lois and Clark when I was a kid. So
yeah.
For whatever reason, I really love Superman. So, it was really good. People have been saying how good it is, but I'm like, sure, whatever. I don't care. I loved it. I really did. This is like me with the Barbie movie all over again. I see one movie a year, and then I rave about it, and then I won't go again because it's like $30 even for a matinee.
Yeah. I'm not really like a comic book like fan or connoisseur or anything like that, or a superhero. Even though I have two boys, you would think that at some point one of them definitely would have gotten me into it. But I do actually enjoy the live action, like all the Marvel movies and stuff that they've done. I think they've all turned out pretty well. My kids do like to watch those. They watch pretty much, they've seen all of them. This is the second Superman movie, right?
That if it is, I don't know. Maybe a different person made it. This is with James Gunn, who's done like Guardians of the Galaxy, stuff like that. He's got like whatever IP, I guess, to do these other things. But it didn't seem like the second part of a two-part.
Okay,
that was it. It felt very much a standalone. But yeah, if you even like kind of have an interest in seeing it, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. Maybe I will take my boys before they go back to school.
Good idea.
Yeah. So our story this week begins in the small rural community of Hopewell, Missouri. Michael Politte was the youngest of three kids born to Rita Ann Smith and Ed Politte. Rita herself had a tragic childhood when both of her parents, Ollie and Marion, died when she was just 3 years old. They were going through a divorce, and after a hearing where Marion was awarded custody and child support, Ollie snapped. Less than 2 hours after that hearing, he showed up at Marion's sister's house where she and the kids were staying. He had a shotgun and he demanded that Marion leave with him. When she refused, he shot her in the face. Marion's sister was also injured before Ollie turned the gun on himself. The police found a new shotgun with the price tag still on next to the bodies, and they learned that Ollie had bought it right after the court hearing and had the barrel sawed off before he drove to the house. But despite this horrific start in life, Rita was always described as being someone who was happy and always smiling and laughing. Rita and Ed raised their children in Hopewell. It was an area that felt so safe that they didn't even need to lock their doors. Their son Michael, who went by Bernie as a child, was extremely close with his mom and could always be found hugging her or just attached at the hip to her. Unfortunately, Ed was mentally and physically abusive, and he was frequently unfaithful to Rita. At times, their arguments would turn physical, and there was one incident where the police were called, and Michael told an officer that his dad pushed his mom to the floor and choked her. According to Michael's sisters, their dad would often put little Michael in the middle of adult arguments. In the summer of 1998, Rita and Ed divorced after 20 years of marriage, and this was largely due to Ed's infidelity. This was not a pleasant divorce whatsoever. There were ongoing court battles over financial settlements, including child and spousal support, as well as squabbles over Ed's retirement. After the divorce was finalized, Ed moved around 90 minutes away to Hazelwood, Missouri, with his then-girlfriend. Even though Ed actually offered to pay his son Michael to live with him, Michael chose to stay with his mom and sister Melanie in Hopewell. By that time, his oldest sister Crystal was already an adult and had moved out. Michael struggled significantly after his parents' divorce. He started acting out, and eventually he became truant from school. At one point, he threatened to kill his mom and himself, which led to him being hospitalized. But he later admitted that he didn't mean the threats, he was just lashing out. Sometime around December 1st, 1998, Rita had reached a significant financial settlement against Ed. She was awarded child support, alimony, and half of his retirement. And of course, Ed was not happy with this, and he had an outburst in the courtroom and shouted that Rita would never live to see a dime of that money. His daughters later told 48 Hours that when it came to their dad, quote, "You don't mess with his money." But still, this threat was eerily similar to how Rita's own mother was killed when she was just a toddler.
On the night of December 4th, 1998, Rita was out for a night with her friends. Her daughter Melanie was at a friend's house, and 14-year-old Michael was supposed to be with Ed, but Ed had called to say he wasn't going to be able to pick him up until the next day. Michael, who was home alone and bored, went down to the Hopewell store and met up with some friends to play pool. Then they stopped at a graveyard before heading back to his house to play video games. Michael invited his friend Josh to spend the night, and at around 11 p.m., the boys went to the railroad tracks near their home and tried to burn a railroad tie before they returned home around midnight. Now, my son is interested in fires, lighting things. My husband apparently was a total pyro as a kid, but this does not seem like a very strange things, like an unsupervised kid,
No.
lighting anything on fire,
No,
right?
not at all. I actually have a very vivid memory, and I was I was younger than Michael was here. Probably I was maybe 12, but I have a vivid memory of my friend and I we were outside playing pretend like we were out camping, but we were actually trying to light a fire like in my backyard, like with like sticks and leaves and stuff. Literally just thinking we're just like playing, and like I don't know where I even found a lighter or just I don't even know where
Right.
we got it from, you know. Of course my mom had no idea that we're in the backyard lighting sticks and like
No.
leaves on fire and stuff. But yeah, I can definitely see just kids doing something like that for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. A short time later, Rita returned home with sandwiches for herself and Michael. Michael shared his sandwich with Josh while Rita listened to messages on the phone and then went to bed. Michael and Josh went to sleep a short time later, with Josh sleeping on the floor next to Michael's bed. At around 6:30 the next morning, Michael awoke to the smell of smoke. He asked Josh if he was smoking a cigarette, but he said no. When they opened the bedroom door, they realized that the house was filled with smoke. As the boys crawled to escape, Michael stopped at his mom's room and found something he never expected. His mother was on fire in her doorway. Michael ran to get the hose outside, but it wouldn't reach, which breaks
Oh
my
my
heart.
gosh.
The thought of this poor little kid grabbing a hose, which, as an adult, like, we know that's not going to work,
Right.
but like a kid, doing whatever he can to help his mom. But his friend Josh ran to a neighbor who called 911. Two other neighbors, including Michael's Uncle Chuck, ran into the home and tried to put out the fire with a pan of water. The fire department and first responders soon arrived, and 40-year-old Rita was tragically pronounced dead. First investigator Jim Holdman was called to the scene, and he arrived around 7:30 a.m. He found Rita lying face up on the floor with her legs spread. She was wearing only underwear, and her body was burned from her pelvis to her head. There was blood on Rita's left thigh, some on the floor, the carpet, a light switch, and a few drops on her bedsheet. The burns had gone through the carpet and the wood. An autopsy later showed that Rita had died of carbon monoxide poisoning, but she had also sustained blunt head trauma and a possible dislocated shoulder. The pathologist said there likely would have been a great deal of blood at the time of the attack.
While at the scene, investigator Holdman quickly concluded that a liquid accelerant, most likely gasoline, had been poured onto Rita's body before she was set on fire. But lab testing was needed to actually confirm this theory. The carpet was taken for testing, but it wouldn't be done for quite some time. Police looked for a murder weapon, and they collected a fire poker, a flashlight, and a baseball bat, but none of them were confirmed as being the weapon that caused Rita's head trauma, and no murder weapon was ever located. Meanwhile, Michael and his friend Josh were separated and questioned in the back of two different police cars. Detective Kurt Davis noted no blood, scratches, or defensive wounds on Michael or Josh, nor did he smell any gasoline or accelerant on them, which you would expect if they had just used some in an arson. Michael's sister, Crystal, arrived at the house at some point and saw Michael in the back of a police car with soot and tear marks on his face. He told her, quote, "I don't know. Mom's dead." Which that whole scene just
breaks me.
It's just crushing. It's absolutely just, I can't, it's so awful.
And this little boy just wants to hug his mom. Like,
Right.
in a terrible, horrifying situation, the person kids naturally gravitate to typically is their mom. And that to be the person that he can't have is just, kills me.
So awful. So Michael and Josh were taken to the police station for further interrogation. On the way to the station, Michael, who, keep in mind, is 14 and has just been through this extremely traumatic event, it's still ongoing. He's still in the middle of this traumatic event. He says to the officer, "What's going to happen to my mom's truck?" Well, the question alone immediately placed Michael under police scrutiny. Personally, as the parent of teenage boys, I don't think it's that strange or alarming that a kid who has just been through something like this would ask questions like that, like without thinking like, oh, this is going to make me look bad. This is a child who is desperately trying to figure out what is about to happen in every sense of the word, right? Like,
Totally.
Where am I going to live? Like, where, what's going to happen to all this stuff? Like, all those things are swimming around in this kid's brain at that moment. Like, there's no way you could convince me that based on that alone, that he had anything to do with this.
Right. Like, is the idea that he's like, what will happen to my mom's truck? I killed her to get the truck and I'm 14 years old and nobody's going to notice. Like that. Right. It seems like an out there question because the kid is in a state of shock.
Absolutely. Yeah. I definitely don't think there was any like weird thing about that at all.
It makes me very angry that they took that from there.
Same.
This whole thing makes me very angry, but that is one that I'm like, are you kidding me?
Right. Exactly. So in the interrogation room, Michael and Josh's account of what happened from the evening before to the time that the first responders arrived were both consistent. The only difference was that Josh recalled hearing a thud and a woman's voice at one point before he drifted off back to sleep. For the next 2 days, Michael and Josh were questioned multiple times. Josh later told 48 Hours that police repeatedly told him, no, that's not what happened. This is what happened. And they started making him question whether or not he was actually telling the truth or if his memory was even right. Michael was interrogated at least 3 more times by at least 4 different officers in multiple locations within 48 hours of his mother's death, all without adequate sleep. Yes, absolutely unbelievable. Michael was not provided an attorney, and he had no adult present on his behalf for most of these interrogations. His father, who should have been a suspect himself, was present at times, which of course creates a conflict of interest.
According to Michael's attorneys, and these are the attorneys that later took his case, he was traumatized and distressed during these interrogations. Of course, that's what you would expect. But Detective Davis interpreted this distress as signs of lying, guilt, and a lack of remorse. Based on this opinion, Davis made Michael take a CVSA test, or computer voice stress analysis. This is a completely unreliable tool used in law enforcement to detect deception. The test was given about 6 hours after Michael found his mother, and, of course, as predicted, it showed significant levels of stress.
Wow, no way.
Police decided that meant deception. I was also thinking of this. Okay, so he's sitting in here being questioned. His dad offered to pay him to live with him, and he didn't want to live with his dad. Now his mom, and like as a teenager, anything for money, and his mom is now dead. I can't imagine the stress of knowing, oh my gosh, I'm going to be living with my dad, this person it doesn't seem like was his number one choice. Like everything about this, duh, it's stressful. I'd be worried if it wasn't a stressful,
right.
Like if it didn't go off. Yeah, this is stressful.
But this whole thing, Melissa, and I don't know if you've ever been, I'm trying to think of like an actual example, but I know for a fact I have been in situations where I have been reacting and whether I've been like emotional about something but then it's being twisted, like you're being gaslit and you're
gosh,
you're guilty of this or because you're upset and you don't want to be caught or whatever the case is. And though like that's not the reason, like I just get very emotional when I am stressed out or feel like cornered in any way. And sometimes it comes out as like crying or, whatever. But to have like a police officer say like you're reacting that way because you're guilty of murder, like, oh my gosh, I really can't think of a worse situation to be in, and especially to be 14 years old.
I know. Fire investigator Holdman and juvenile officer Jerry Chamberlain then interrogated Michael again, and this time it was with his father, Ed, present. They told Michael that he failed the CVSA test and that they knew he had killed his mom. Michael later told 48 Hours that at that point, they weren't even questioning him anymore. They were just telling him that he did something. Keep in mind, his dad, Ed, is present, and from what I know and what I've seen, I don't think Ed was denying that he did anything either in the room, on his behalf. Michael was exhausted and confused, but he continued to maintain his innocence and told the same consistent story. In investigator Holdman's report, he wrote that Michael never showed any visible remorse and that the boy was calm except for when Holdman would inform him that he wasn't telling the truth. Next, investigator Bob Jacobson and his canine were brought in, and they demanded that Michael hand over his shoes. The shoes were taken to another location outside of Michael's presence, and the dog allegedly made a positive alert for an accelerant. The shoes were then seized, and later testing supposedly confirmed that there was gasoline on them. According to investigator Holdman, after the dog alerted on the shoes, Michael became very irate and started cursing, and they said that Ed had to calm him down. Michael tried to explain that the gasoline on his shoes meant absolutely nothing because he and his friends often set fires for fun. He and Josh had actually just set a fire on the railroad tracks hours earlier, which the police were able to confirm. Michael was interrogated a fourth time without an attorney, and he gave the same consistent details. Meanwhile, Josh was also repeatedly interrogated, and the police were actively trying to pit him against Michael, but both boys maintained their stories. And we still have so much more to get into after a quick break to hear a word from this week's sponsors. We've hit that part of summer where it's not even cool at night anymore. You go to bed and the AC is still working overtime, so having sheets that help keep me cooler isn't optional. It's a necessity. And that's why I love my Boll & Branch percale sheets. They're cool, crisp, and breathable, like that first blast of air when you open the fridge on a hot day. They're made with the finest 100% organic cotton, free from toxins, and they have this special cooling weave that helps me stay comfortable all night instead of tossing and turning and complaining. You can feel the quality the second you touch them. They're soft in that hotel sheet way, but without the "these have definitely been used by 4,000 strangers" part. And they even get softer with every wash, which still amazes me. So if you're tired of sleeping hot, especially in the middle of summer, Boll & Branch percale sheets are the answer you're looking for. Feel the difference an extraordinary night's sleep can make with Boll & Branch. Get 15% off plus free shipping on your first set of sheets at bollandbranch.com/moms. That's Boll & Branch, BOLLAND, branch.com/moms to save 15% and unlock free shipping. Exclusions apply. If it were up to me, I'd wear sweats everywhere. Grocery store, sweats. Dinner out, sweats. Recording this podcast, definitely sweats. But unfortunately, there are still places in life where jeans or even dress pants are actually appropriate. And that's why I love Daily Look. They send me pieces that are amazing, feel amazing, and most importantly, fit me perfectly. Being tall and finding the right fit can be a nightmare, but my Daily Look stylist totally gets me. In my last box, she sent a pair of Good American jeans that were chef's kiss. Perfect length, flattering in all the right places, and so comfortable, I almost forgot I wasn't in sweats. That's really the beauty of Daily Look. You're not just getting random pics from an algorithm. You have a real personal stylist who learns your style, your body shape, and your lifestyle and sends up to 12 premium pieces right to your door. You try on everything at home, keep what you love, and send the rest back with free shipping both ways. They work with brands that I already love, like Good American, Kate Spade, AG, and so much more. So I always know the quality is going to be there. It's time to get your own personal stylist with Daily Look. Head to dailylook.com to take your style quiz and use code MOMS50 for 50% off your first order. Once again, that's dailylook.com for 50% off, and make sure you use our promo code MOMS50 so they know we sent you. One last time, dailylook.com and promo code MOMS50. And now back to the episode.
Before the break, we introduced you to 14-year-old Michael Politte. He's a boy who had just lost his mom in the most horrific way imaginable. Rita had survived an unthinkable childhood only to be murdered just days after winning a bitter court battle against her ex-husband, Ed. Michael, who was supposed to be with his dad that night, stayed at home instead, and he was the one who discovered Rita's burning body and ran for help. But instead of being treated as a grieving child, Michael was treated as a suspect. Within hours, he was interrogated multiple times without a lawyer, given a stress test that police claimed showed deception, and accused of having gasoline on his shoes, all while being traumatized and sleep-deprived. And unfortunately, the investigation was only just getting started. Despite believing that Michael was the killer, investigators did interview other people. Rita's friends, Tina and Frances, confirmed that she had been with them the night before and that she had gone home around 11:30 because she wanted to get Michael something to eat. Police also interviewed Ed, who claimed he was 80 miles away with his girlfriend at the time of the murder. The police really didn't seem to look any further into this claim, even though Ed had just threatened Rita in court 4 days earlier.
Which would literally be part of the court record. Like, that seems like a very easy thing you could have seen.
For sure. But they also didn't even consider the possibility that Ed could have hired someone to kill Rita. Rita's boyfriend, Rick, was also interviewed and given that CVSA test, but he passed and was quickly disregarded as a suspect as well. 2 days after Rita's murder, on December 7th, Josh was offered immunity in exchange for telling the police what really happened. Michael's lawyers now believe that the prosecutors are trying to get Josh to testify against Michael, and he took the deal because he thought it would prevent them from pinning the murder on him. He gave a videotaped statement with officers and his mom present, and he told the same story that he'd been consistently telling the entire time. But when he was asked if he saw Michael in the room when he heard this thud sound, Josh said no. So the officers pressed him further and said, "So there's no doubt that he wasn't in the bed. Okay. And was he anywhere else in that bedroom?" So Josh seems really confused by the question, but he answered no. And he later told 48 Hours that he didn't even remember saying anything like that and thought it must have just been a weak point in this interrogation. Later, Josh clarified in a deposition that he never sat up from where he was sleeping that night. He said, "It's not that I did not see him in his bed, it's that I couldn't see him in his bed," meaning it was dark and Josh was sleeping on the floor. So he literally could not see if Josh was in his bed or not.
Yeah.
But after Josh's immunity statement, Michael was arrested for his mother's murder. He became visibly upset and asked for an attorney. As he was handcuffed, he frantically asked officers to take his fingerprints because someone was trying to frame him. He desperately insisted that he did not kill his own mother. At the time of Michael's arrest, police had no lab confirmation of gasoline, and they had not thoroughly investigated other potential suspects. In general, they had no motive or explanation for why Michael would kill his mom at all. Michael was sent to a juvenile detention center, but he believed he would ultimately be found innocent. His sisters, Melanie and Crystal, were absolutely shocked and thought the police were crazy. Michael's uncle, who lived next door and saw Michael shortly after Rita was found, also felt that the police had made a mistake. He said he never saw any blood or sign of a struggle and that Michael was screaming and was very authentically upset. Chuck also noted that the water hose was inside the house when he arrived, which was consistent with Michael and Josh's story of trying to put out the fire.
That visual just sticks with me, just thinking of these two little boys trying to put this fire out. I don't know.
It's just a situation way beyond what they can handle.
Yeah, absolutely. I just get very enraged in this story. So the next day, December 8th, Michael attended his mother's funeral with his legs shackled and with a police escort. On December 9th, a detention hearing was held, and Michael's public defender described the case as thin and circumstantial at best. But Michael was ordered to remain in custody. As the investigation continued, more flaws and errors emerged. Due to their rush judgment of Michael as the killer, the police had ignored or failed to preserve significant forensic evidence that just so happened to not implicate Michael. Things that were overlooked included a fresh boot print outside Rita's home that didn't match Michael's shoes, DNA from a semen stain on a towel in Rita's bedroom that matched her boyfriend Rick, and additional semen and non-semen stains on Rita's bed were found to be consistent with a genetic mixture of at least 3 people. Furthermore, lab testing on the carpet showed no trace of accelerant, but instead of concluding that no accelerant was used, the police assumed it had just burned up. This was an assumption that was not based in science whatsoever. Other evidence, such as Michael's clothing and Rita's rape kit, were not tested at all initially, and getting fingernail clippings after the fact would require exhuming Rita's body. There was significant evidence pointing towards Rita's ex-husband, Ed, which police essentially just ignored while the investigation remained solely on Michael. On January 5th, 1999, exactly 1 month after his mom's death, Michael was caught attempting suicide while detained. He was found tying a sheet to a ceiling vent, and when he was asked why he was doing it, he said he didn't want to live anymore and that he hadn't cared since, quote, they killed his mom. The state later alleged that what Michael said was that he hadn't cared since he killed his mom, but that's not what he said. Counselor Karen Blankenship, who was called to Michael's cell, wrote a detailed report that included that Michael expressed fear of being tried as an adult, but he didn't mention any involvement in his mom's death. But later, Karen amended her report at the urging of Deputy Officer Cheryl Graham. At this point, Karen includes that alleged confession. Another officer's notes also claim that Michael spontaneously yelled, quote, "I haven't cared since December 5th. That's when I killed my mom," end quote.
At every point before this alleged admission, Michael had asserted his innocence to his family and to others. In April of 1999, he told a sheriff's officer, "I wish my mom was here. She would tell everyone that I didn't do it." Michael was offered a plea bargain. If he pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, he'd get 15 years. His public defender seemed to support this idea, but Michael rejected the offer and refused to plead guilty for a crime he didn't commit. Michael later told NPR, quote, "I'll die here. I didn't murder my mother, and she's going to get her justice." Meanwhile, the state continued to interrogate Josh for a total of 8 times over several years, but he always told the same story, and he corroborated Michael's memory of the events and his innocence. Since Josh's testimony did not align with the prosecution's theory, they didn't call him as a witness at trial, even though he was the only other person in the house at the time of Rita's murder. By the time the case went to trial in January of 2002, Michael was physically much larger than the 14-year-old boy he was when his mom died. This older, more mature person was who the jury observed. The state's theory that Michael was responsible for Rita's death hinged solely on the gasoline that was supposedly found on his shoes. That was really the only piece of physical evidence that could potentially tie him to the crime. Prosecutors used Michael's admission about setting a fire on the train tracks the night before to claim that the burn pattern on the tracks matched Rita's burns, implying that Michael was the only person who could have possibly done this. The jury also heard about a disagreement Michael had with his mom over money the week before. He was allegedly seen flicking a lighter afterwards, which the state used to portray him as threatening.
But they didn't mention that in court, his dad said, "You'll never live to see this money" 4 days before. Got it.
Right. The state did not call Josh to the witness stand, but the jury was told that he'd been granted immunity. And one juror later told 48 Hours that it was confusing because if Josh was offered immunity, then they felt he must know something, so they were not sure why they didn't get to hear from him. Michael's sisters were also not called to the stand. Fire Marshal Jim Holdman was the state's key witness. He testified that the fire was set intentionally with an accelerant, though he admitted that there was none found in the carpet sample. But he claimed it could have just burned up in the fire.
The state also emphasized the biased interpretation of Michael's behavior after the fire and portrayed him as being guilty and remorseless. A volunteer firefighter named Eric testified that Michael was not screaming, but his eyes were red as if he'd been crying. His statement actually wasn't even provided until 3 years after the murder. Detectives Davis and Holdman testified that Michael was acting normal and not concerned about what happened and that he had no visible signs of remorse until he realized he was a suspect. They admitted that their belief in Michael's guilt was based on his behavior and statements. Sadly, Michael's defense counsel really did nothing to challenge the character assassination of their young client. The state also presented testimony from juvenile officers Jerry Johnson and Cheryl Graham regarding Michael's alleged confession during his suicide attempt. They did not call Karen Blankenship to corroborate this, and there was no audio recorded despite there being a camera present, which feels very convenient. Neighbors of Rita testified that Michael had no cuts, scratches, or blood on him, and his uncle Chuck verified that Michael's account of events was true. Michael was in a very tough position. He was being represented by a public defender with no prior homicide case experience, and he presented the defense's case in less than half a day. They did not argue Michael's innocence directly, but instead focused on the lack of evidence, such as a murder weapon and the fact that Michael had no injuries or blood on him, despite what prosecutors claimed was a violent attack. In total, the defense only called 3 witnesses. They were Karen Blankenship, who testified that she only changed her report at the urging of Officer Graham, but she was not questioned effectively in a way that would challenge her amended statement. Michael's Aunt Patsy was also put on the stand, and she testified that Michael was in shock and that he had no blood or cuts on him after the murder. And the Washington County coroner testified that Rita's time of death was likely between 6 and 6:15 a.m. That's like no witnesses. I mean, that's really not saying a whole lot.
No.
At all. Like, I don't understand. Michael did not take the stand, and Josh was not called by the defense either. They pretty much did nothing to challenge the state's case. They didn't even offer a rebuttal or do their own investigation into the gasoline and arson evidence or the questionable interpretations of Michael's behavior immediately after his mother was killed. These failures on the defense's part were critical mistakes. During 4.5 hours of deliberation, the jury asked to see all photographs, videos, and notes. They also asked specifically to examine Michael's shoes. After several votes, the jury returned a guilty verdict and convicted Michael of second-degree murder. At his sentencing a few months later, his sisters testified in support of him and told the court that this outcome would mean their family was denied true justice. They believed their mother's killer was still at large. And his sister Crystal said, quote, "Today you guys are putting an innocent person in jail." And we still have more to get into after one last break to hear a word from this week's sponsors. Okay, here's something I didn't know until recently. Your liver is actually the second largest organ in your body and has over 500 jobs. 500. Meanwhile, I can barely remember to switch the laundry from the washer to the dryer, and we're not even going to count from the dryer to actually putting it up because that is an even bigger mess. So yeah, I feel like my liver deserves a little extra help, and that's why I've been taking Dose for Your Liver. It's this quick little shot that supports your liver, helps it flushing out unwanted elements, and basically keeps your body's filter running like it should. And here's my favorite part. One dose shot is the same as 17 shots of turmeric juice. 17, without me actually drinking turmeric like I just lost a bet. Plus, it's gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, vegan, and tastes way better than you'd expect from something that's actually so good for you. It takes me about 10 seconds in the morning, which even I have time to do, and I feel like I'm actually doing something good for myself without adding yet another complicated step to my day. Save 25% on your first month of subscription by going to dosedaily.co/moms or entering moms at checkout. That's dosedaily.co/moms for 25% off your first month subscription. And now back to the episode.
Before the break, we saw how investigators focused almost entirely on Michael despite having no clear motive or solid evidence. They did briefly question others like his father, Ed, who had actually just threatened Rita, but they never seriously pursued any alternative suspects. When Michael's friend Josh was offered immunity, he stuck to his story, but one unclear answer led to Michael's arrest. Evidence that didn't support the theory was ignored or mishandled, and Michael was pushed toward a plea deal that he refused to take. At the trial, the state leaned on flawed science and Michael's trauma response, while his defense barely even pushed back. In the end, the jury convicted him of second-degree murder, and the real questions about who killed Rita were left unanswered. After his sentencing, Michael was sent to the Missouri State Penitentiary, which was once called the bloodiest 47 acres in America. Michael was absolutely stunned because he never thought that he would be convicted of his mom's murder. Prison was really tough for Michael, especially because he was so young. It made him a target, and he got into a fight on his very first day and went on to face a number of threats. He became so desperate for safety that he actually joined a skinhead gang, which is something that he later said was not at all what he wanted to do. He said, quote, "It's not the way that I feel. It's not the way that mom raised me. I just didn't fit in." He said he felt like he had to join the gang just to survive his time in prison. Michael was determined to prove his innocence, but sadly, all of his initial appeals were denied. His father, Ed, failed to help Michael hire a lawyer, so Michael lost hope for several years and actually turned to heroin as a way to self-medicate. Michael and his sisters all eventually cut contact with their father. 5 years after being convicted, Michael wrote a letter to the Midwest Innocence Project, and they took on his case. Attorneys Tricia Bushnell, Megan Crane, and Mark Emison got involved in the case, and they started meticulously re-examining everything, beginning with the prosecution's claim that an accelerant had been used. They found that investigator Holdman's immediate determination that gasoline was used based only on visual patterns actually contradicted the gold standard of fire investigating, which has to include lab testing. In addition, when carpet samples showed no sign of accelerant, the police just ignored that, and prosecutors explained it away by saying it could have just burned up, which is not a claim that's based in science. I'm assuming that what they're saying is like, that's not how it worked. We would still be able to detect accelerant even though, the fire had burned.
That's what I was like, the main fire detective saying like, well, I guess it burned up in the fire or whatever. I'm like, don't you know? How is this a thing that you're kind of questioning? Like, well, that's why. How do you know that? You don't know that. And it's wild that he was the expert in this case and saying stuff like that.
For sure. So what's worse is that the attorneys also found no concrete proof of gasoline on Michael's shoes as they had claimed. When the shoes were retested, the Missouri State Crime Lab discovered that a chemical used in shoe manufacturing had been wrongly identified as gasoline.
Unreal.
Absolutely unreal. In a letter written decades later in 2020, officials stated that while it wasn't widely known in the late 90s, it is now understood that solvents found in footwear adhesives actually do have similar properties to gasoline.
The team also learned about evidence that was never even tested, as well as other relevant evidence that could have been examined with new technology, things like Michael's clothing or Rita's rape kit. These things could never be tested, though, because they weren't properly stored. They were commingled, covered with mold, and in some cases, eaten by rats. Fingerprint evidence was lost, and a baseball bat in evidence had no chain of custody form. It was incredibly sloppy, and that meant that physical evidence that could have excluded Michael as a perpetrator either wasn't available or never collected to begin with. A former Washington, D.C. homicide detective named Jim Tranium looked over the case file at the request of Michael's attorneys, and what he saw was appalling to him. He told NPR that the police had, quote, rushed in, came to their conclusions too quickly, cherry-picked the evidence, which they did not document very well, and then used tactics during their interviews that were very problematic, end quote. He said that when faulty scientific findings are added to the mix, the whole investigation kind of just falls apart. Michael's team also consulted a clinical and forensic psychologist who confirmed that Michael's behavior immediately after Rita's death was not at all abnormal for a child experiencing extreme trauma. The science has long proven that children's brains and trauma responses are not the same as adults. She actually insinuated that it was unfair for Michael to have been painted as remorseless due to his trauma response. The team also discovered that the police completely ignored other viable suspects, specifically Ed and his cousin Johnny. They actually believed that Ed was the one with a motive to kill Rita. They also identified witnesses who placed Johnny near the crime scene on the morning of the murder. A man named Larry, who actually knew Johnny, said he saw him walking on the railroad near Rita's house as sirens approached that morning. Johnny had asked if the man had heard about Rita, and he said, quote, somebody killed her. A week later, Johnny showed up at Larry's door at 6 a.m., asking his wife what she knew about Rita's death. He claimed that he and Ed were doing their own investigation. It definitely sounds more like, I want to know what you know, and
for sure,
not to be telling other people. Another man said that he saw Johnny's truck near the same spot that Larry saw him, just as emergency vehicles were arriving. Michael and his sisters all felt that it was plausible that their dad had been behind the horrific murder. Michael later said that he believed his dad was responsible and that he had hired Johnny to help him. According to Michael's sisters, Ed has always denied involvement when he was asked.
After their investigation, Michael's legal team was convinced that he had been wrongfully convicted. At some point, one of the jurors from his trial, a woman named Linda, contacted these attorneys and said that she had been torn during deliberations but ultimately went along with the other jurors. Over the years, though, she had many regrets, and when she learned that the Midwest Innocence Project got involved, she wanted to work with them to help overturn Michael's conviction. Linda even tried to meet with the prosecuting attorney herself, but he actually wouldn't see her. On August 22nd, 2021, Michael and his attorneys filed for a writ of habeas corpus. In the petition, they stated that Michael had been wrongfully imprisoned for over 22 years for a crime he didn't commit, with no valid evidence connecting him to the crime. They stated that his conviction rested on false fire signs and lies told by the state. They also pointed out that Michael and his sisters had been fighting for his freedom when they should have been grieving their mother. It was suggested that the court should grant release based on his innocence, but also because his constitutional rights were violated by being convicted on false evidence and that the state knew was unreliable. They said Rita deserved justice, but she wasn't the only victim. Her family, including her then 14-year-old son, are also victims of the state's failure to properly investigate and prosecute her murderer, not to mention their knowing of misconduct. After submitting the petition, Michael made statements in a press release. He said the judicial system was overseen by flawed human beings who do not want to get anything wrong. They don't want to admit that they wrongfully convicted a 14-year-old for murdering his own mother. He added that the most difficult part was waking up every day in prison knowing that the person who really killed his mom is free and doesn't give it a second thought. He said that justice for his family would mean his release and a true investigation into his mom's murder. He added that the only way she would be at peace is for him to be released. Less than a week later, Michael's petition was denied by the Court of Appeals, but his attorneys could still take the case to the Missouri Supreme Court, and Michael vowed to keep fighting.
In 2021, a bill passed in Missouri that offered juvenile offenders convicted of serious crimes a second chance. Michael was now eligible for parole, so he went before the parole board and explained that he was innocent and laid out all the reasons why they should believe him. And it actually worked. Michael was granted parole, but that still meant life on parole, where he'd be subject to quarterly check-ins and would require permission to leave the state. I was shocked that they granted him parole at this point, because so many times you hear that somebody goes to the parole board that is innocent and says, I'm innocent, I'm not saying I did this. And you'll have attorneys tell them, or whatever, people in their ear saying, if you just say you did this, have remorse, you're more likely to get parole. I love that Michael said, absolutely not doing that. Here's what happened and here's why I'm innocent. And they actually granted him parole, which he deserves much more than that. But
For sure.
Just unreal. So in April of 2022, after serving 23 years behind bars, Michael walked out of prison at 38 years old. His sisters were there with friends and family, and Michael addressed a crowd of people and expressed his overwhelming joy and sense of freedom. A friend who used to ride bikes with Michael brought 2 bicycles, and Michael said, quote, "We're going to take a bike ride from the parking lot to the railroad tracks. I'm leaving here the same way I came here, riding a bicycle. Justice for Rita. Let's go, man," end quote. After he was released, Michael moved in with his sister Melanie. He started covering up his prison tattoos with new art, he found a job as a carpenter, and he got his driver's license. Though he was free from prison, Michael still wasn't completely free, and he knew he needed to clear his name, find the real killer, and get justice for his mom. As of today, 5 jurors, including Linda, who we mentioned before, have come forward with sworn affidavits questioning whether Michael got a fair trial. Michael's team reached out to the prosecutor's office and the predecessor to the original DA, which was Josh Hedgecorth. He agreed to reopen the case under the state's new wrongful conviction law. Michael also sat down with 48 Hours and talked about finding his mom on fire. He said, quote, "There's nothing in this world that anybody could ever do to me that's going to be worse than what I saw. The individual that did that to my mother hated her with everything inside of them," end quote. He also talked about enjoying his time with his sisters, finally being able to grieve, and vowing to get justice for Rita. DA Hedgecorth told 48 Hours he doesn't believe that Michael had a fair trial. He said that on the evidence that he had today, he doesn't think he would file this case for retrial. He also said that he feels bad for Michael, who lost his whole childhood and his early adulthood, like most of it, the time when people were getting their stuff together. He's in prison.
In 2023, Michael's team filed another petition for habeas corpus, but DA Hedgecorth's efforts to reopen the case faced jurisdictional complications, as the Missouri Supreme Court ruled he couldn't pursue the case because the trial took place in a different county. The state quickly moved to fix this flaw, but in the meantime, Hedgecorth actually lost his bid for re-election, and unfortunately, the new DA that took over has shown no interest in resuming the wrongful conviction case. I am just appalled.
It's injustice on top of injustice on top of injustice. It's like, how much more can one person have going against them?
Horrible.
You finally get a little taste of freedom, but you're still on parole. You finally have somebody that says, yeah, I would not retrial this with what we have. And the next person's like, well, this is not really my problem. I don't agree with the last guy. Like, you just never have real justice in this case.
No, it's horrible. In April of 2025, Michael spoke with NPR and reflected on his 3 years of freedom so far. He said he's focusing on his family and he's been working as a general foreman. He spends the weekends with his sisters, niece, nephews, and his girlfriend. Michael is proud of the way he's transitioned back into society, but he reiterated that being on parole for life means that he is not truly a free man. If his conviction is not overturned, he has a life sentence, even if that means a lifetime of checking in with parole officers and getting travel permits just to be able to travel for his job, even. He'll never be able to vote, never own a firearm, or go hunting. Michael said, quote, "Having a felony conviction on your record holds you back in so many aspects of life. You can't fully be productive." Michael shared that being exonerated would mean more than just freedom from parole. It would mean his mother's murder was technically unsolved and the investigation into it could and should be reopened. As of today, Michael and his team are still pushing for Washington County Prosecutor John Jones to pursue a wrongful conviction case. If he doesn't, the court could act on the habeas petition that was filed in 2023, or the governor also has the option of granting a commutation. Michael absolutely resents the rules of his parole, but he has acknowledged that it does, it beats being in prison. And I do agree with him there, but I also think he is well within his rights to be frustrated and feel like that sense of hatred towards even being on parole.
Absolutely. So this case, if you couldn't tell, gets me very fired up because there's this poor boy whose mom has been taken away from him. All of his innocence is gone. His poor mom went through the same thing as a child. There's a very obvious suspect that was not looked into, and one that I feel like threw their son under the bus. Like, imagine going to prison. Imagine seeing your child go to prison, knowing that you have more information, allegedly, and knowing they're spending their life in prison for something you could have allegedly done. I cannot even understand a monster like that. Ever.
No, I can't. And there was one thing in the research where I had read that when they were first interrogating Michael, and in one of these moments when they were telling Michael, that he was going to be under arrest and they were charging him with murder, and his dad Ed was there at that for that particular meeting, and in one of the sources it said that Michael had this outburst and started like crying hysterically and like screaming, like using profanity and like saying like begging his dad to like do something, tell them something, like basically saying like this is BS, and like they were saying that Ed was just trying to calm him down and soothe him and like it'll be all right, but like just thinking that allegedly if he did know something or have anything to do with it, like imagining him, just what kind of a psychopath could even sit through that? Like your son is frantic and is saying like they're about to arrest me for murder and take me away, and like you know something and you're doing nothing, you're letting it happen.
Quite honestly, as a parent, even if you were not involved, wouldn't you, like, my natural response would be like, I know my kid didn't do this. I'm going to do whatever I can to take it off of him if I have to I don't know, like, there's just something about like being a parent and wanting to protect your kid, and the fact that he doesn't hire him an attorney. He did get to keep all of his benefits, so we know he wasn't completely broke. He kept everything because Rita didn't get a dime. It's just unreal how much it makes me angry. We've been wanting to do this case for a while. I was hoping we could do it when Michael's finally exonerated, but that still hasn't happened. But his case was actually on a show. I don't know if you guys watched this, Mandy. I don't know if you saw it, but it was called Unlocking the Truth, and it was about some exonerations, and it was actually on MTV, which I was surprised. I did not realize it was out in 2016, so this has been a while ago. Ryan Ferguson. So we covered Ryan Ferguson's case before. He was exonerated, so this was like what he was doing, this project with MTV. Michael's one of the cases that was on there. And when I heard this story about Michael, I could not believe, I just cannot understand for the life of me how prosecutors, how officers, and there are very good ones, and this is not directed towards any of them, but how you cannot have enough evidence, how you could even think for a second before putting a child behind bars. Like, do we know that we know that we know? Like, think of what's just happened here. Like, I want to be so certain that I'm not traumatizing this person more. Also, when you convict the wrong person, then a murderer is free. I never understand why people will pigeonhole one person, knowing that that means like somebody else could go kill somebody in your family. You don't know. Why is there so much, why is, I guess, rush justice? Like they want to be able to end it, whatever. It just makes me so mad. But if you ever get a chance to watch Unlocking the Truth, there was another guy, Calvin Michael Smith, who was on there that his story broke my heart. He ended up dying a couple years ago. It's just wrongful convictions absolutely just break my heart. And I don't know. It just feels like it's lazy police work, lazy everything. And the poor kid had no attorney that could do this. Like, it's not necessarily the attorney's fault, but he doesn't have the resources. Even them saying, like, they didn't test the evidence themselves, they probably didn't have the budget to do that, honestly. So, I don't know. Again, this works me up. And I've signed every petition. We'll put a petition in our show notes, sign it, share it. I feel like he really does deserve. I can't imagine there's a part of him that won't feel healed from his mom dying until like his name is not attached to it. I cannot imagine.
Sure. Yeah, no, I know. And it is frustrating in this case too, because like you said, like, where's the human element of like compassion? Where's the common sense? Like none of the cops that were involved or any of the prosecutors, nobody was a parent themselves. Nobody's ever been around a child or a teenager like that could say like, you know what, actually, I feel like you guys are making a much bigger deal out of these things than like what's reasonable. Like I can understand if you don't have a lot of experience with kids or, you know, if you don't have any, but I feel like anyone who's been around children or a teenager would be able to say like, no, everything he did like seemed perfectly normal.
I know. And you know what else? The Josh of it all. Like this poor kid is in here. His best friend is being accused of killing him. They're sticking to the same story because it was the truth. But the idea that Josh didn't get in trouble, which obviously I'm glad he didn't. But the idea is that Michael got up in the middle of the night, killed his mom, set the house on fire. They run out and grab a fire hose. That doesn't make any sense. Like you would think it would be both of them or none of them. Kids just aren't that. I don't know. I'll stop, but I am still fired up over this story.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a very frustrating story. And I absolutely hope that Michael gets the justice that he deserves. And I hope that they are able to finally identify Rita's real killer one day. And
I feel like it could be pretty easy.
It could be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's all I have to say.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, that was the episode for this week. But before we go, we did just want to quickly remind you guys that we are going to be at CrimeCon this year. We're super excited. CrimeCon this year is going to be in Denver, Colorado. So beautiful location. Should be beautiful weather if you enjoy hot during the day and maybe a little bit cooler in the evenings. And enjoy trying to figure out how to dress for that type of weather.
You are really frustrated with that side of it.
Yes, I know. So it's happening on September 5th through 7th, and you can use our code MOMS to get 10% off your standard badge if you would like to attend. We will be there. We always have a great time at CrimeCon meeting everyone, so we hope to see you guys there.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
All right. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.